Hello, guys. Thank you for tuning into the podcast. Today we have someone that does the best job, in my opinion, in terms of bridging the gap from bodybuilding towards kind of just like our general kind of goals and fat loss and kind of mindset and just kind of get in amazing shape. And today we're going to cover some amazing stuff. So Millie is an online coach. She's a figure competitor, helping people get in shape, stay in shape for life after having battled through her own big journey and getting to where she is now. And I think there's so many gems that we can cover in today. Millie, thank you so much for tuning in today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to have a little bit of a chat and hopefully spread a little bit of wisdom or help wherever I can.
Brilliant. So in terms of kind of what people can expect from it, or people listening can expect from this, I was thinking just kind of helping guys and girls just find a bit more of their purpose, find motivation, and just see kind of what we can unpack for bodybuilding, even if the people listening, which be the majority of us, have no kind of goals or ideas of competing, and they probably find it a little bit daunting. So kind of just what we can unpack for that as well. In terms of the introduction and kind of where we started, was there anything else you wanted to add to that at all?
Yeah, I think it's just important for people to understand that for me, I have equally come from being someone who was just trying to live a happy and healthy life to, go on my own weight loss journey. And that's what I did in all the wrong ways at the start. I've battled through a bit of a binge eating disorder, I've battled through chronic illness, inflammatory bowel disease. So I've overcome a lot of obstacles from being someone who was quite unfit, unhealthy, out of shape, to then getting to the point where I decided that, fitness and bodybuilding is my passion. And then eventually ended up stepping on stage to compete, and will continue to do that in the future as a natural athlete. So it's not like I'm someone who has been in shape my whole life, right? This has all happened within the last kind of 3 to 4 years. So I am super relatable when it comes to anyone who might just be looking to try and become a little bit fitter, healthier, and manage like a busy life alongside their fitness journey.
Yeah, and I think this is something that comes across like extremely well, like I said, from your stuff, because a lot of kind of bodybuilding stuff can seem a little bit like, okay, I've got to have my blue light blockers on, I've got to do this. It's got, like, for a lot of us, it can seem like, okay, we're kind of here where you were at the beginning. How do I go from here to all the way up here with having it all sorted, having the meals prepped? And I think it makes it so relatable and so easy to go down that route and take the next step.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when people get into bodybuilding, they're looking to like optimize every tiny variable. Like when you go to sleep, your sleep cycle being like perfect. And also when you're training, your pre and post workout meals, like that's something which is like very much so like looking through a magnifying glass as to where you can optimize things. But I remember when I was at uni and just trying to learn how to track my food, how to manage like my master's degree alongside prepping my food to take it into the library and somehow get some steps in whilst I was studying for all of my exams for my chemistry degree. So like there is like two totally different areas where you can look at just generally sustaining and learning how to get that structure and routine to your life. But then bodybuilding is quite the opposite, where that structure and routine to your life is the blueprint to all of the optimization and your success. And I've kind of like started off with the normal structure of how I can, improve my fitness levels and progress with my weight loss journey. But then I've kind of like leveled that up to now where every tiny thing does matter in order to make that long-term progression from a competitive perspective.
Yeah, and I suppose with that, like when you were first starting out, and a big thing was just, how do I track my food? How do I kind of get in the gym and do these exercises, that kind of thing? Or I suppose maybe with that. So I suppose at that point, the goal was the goal at that point to get into bodybuilding, or was it just to improve how you look and that kind of side of things?
Yeah. So like at first it like stepping on a bodybuild, I didn't even know what bodybuilding was, right? I literally didn't even know what it was a year until before I started competing. But when it was a case of me getting to the point that I decided to start on my fitness journey, it was because I was just really, really not happy in my body composition, like really just hated the way that I looked. And also I was unhealthy. Like at that point I'd been diagnosed with my inflammatory bowel disease, and I had strong kind of feelings that autoimmune disease had been triggered due to like the stress of life, uni, but also going out drinking all the time, eating terrible food. I've never been like someone who's been fit and healthy my whole life. I grew up with like, comfort eating, binge eating due to like, childhood trauma that I went through. So that's something that I've never been that person who's been in shape until like literally about 3 years ago. So at that point, it was just, I need to get healthy and I need to change the way that I look because I'm not happy with it. But actually, because it was all based on aesthetics at that point, no training performance related goals, nothing else when it came to, looking after my actual well-being overall, it got to the point where I was just, crash dieting and not even really exercising just in order to try and lose body fat. And I succeeded, but let's just say that I yo-yoed for a long time after that. And it really did not help the kind of issues that I had with the relationship with food.
Okay, yeah, and yeah, I see, and I suppose with that, then like with that kind of side of things, you kind of mentioned just kind of having other factors as well. So it's not just fat loss, it's not just I want to look a certain way. It's also having those performance side of things. So when you kind of first started setting those, when did you realize they were important, and what did they kind of start looking like initially for you?
Yeah, so what happened with me was that I'd gone through my initial kind of weight loss journey for about 8 or 9 months. I had, ended up losing like 20, 25 pounds. I was really happy with how I kind of like looked, but then actually I was happy to an extent that I was smaller, but I hadn't got any shape. I looked really, really flat within my physique. So you can progress with fat loss by not doing any exercise and just dieting really hard, but you've got no muscle mass, right? So I didn't have any glutes, I didn't have any delts, like I looked really flat, and it was almost like a skinny fat look, which I wasn't happy with. And from finding other content creators who talked about powerlifting, who talked about getting strong, I decided to go to my university strength sports club to try out a session of powerlifting. And kind of 6 to 9 months later, something like that, I was on the committee and I was buying the equipment for the club. So like I fell in love with lifting heavy, and that's what completely changed everything for me, to not be aesthetics driven but to focus on getting really strong.
Okay, and I suppose by the sounds of it, that kind of made things like a lot more consistent in a way, because the goal wasn't kind of, oh, I need to look at a certain way. It was kind of like, let's keep the progression going. And with powerlifting and with being in the gym, there's kind of really never an end goal to it. But potentially with weight loss and fat loss, we can get carried away where it's like, okay, I've lost the weight, now I kind of feel a bit skinny fat. What do I kind of do?
Yeah, exactly that. When I started like going to the powerlifting meets, it was like, one, because I was running one of them on the kind of women's only night. It was getting other women to be strong and learning how to train them. But then also the training sessions, the way that we had them, set out was each week we'd do, squat, bench, deadlift together. We'd make sure that we'd, go and practice all these different movements, and it was more of a community element. So rather than it changing to be something where I was focused on body composition, it was like, oh no, like I've got to go train with my club, I've got to see my friends, and I've got to work on whatever lift I'm doing. So it completely flipped the perspective of me wanting to kind of look a certain way, but actually it was like, no, I can see that she's squatting 100 kilos, how do I get there? Because at the moment I can only do 40. So that was the transition of like it. That's where the first kind of like element of competition came in, not of wanting to try and necessarily be better than other people, but to be the best that I could be. And then to also just have that camaraderie of celebrating successes together, because, no one's going to cheer you and clap you for every single pound that you've lost. There's not really that thing. But when you're training with other people or you're on a bodybuilding stage, people are there literally screaming for you and really cheering you on because you're showing off everything that you've worked so hard for.
Yeah, brilliant. And I suppose with that as well, it's kind of like for the guys listening, it shows how important it is to try and recreate that in our own goals. So it's not just weight loss, it's also like, how can we kind of create that community? How can we kind of strive towards to be the best we can possibly be? So for people listening, it can be kind of having that strength stuff, and the community side of things can be searching out and not stressing as much around just scale weight. I suppose, would that be the case? Or
Yeah. If you want to maintain, if you have a weight loss goal, for instance, or even if you have like a kind of like building goal, if you want to get to a certain, I don't know, if you want your biceps to be a certain amount of inches, right? yes, you can measure that every single week, and yes, you can measure your scale weight every single week, but if that's the one kind of factor that you're using to propel you forwards, that change takes a long time to happen. You will run out of gas like really quickly if you haven't got another element which you're celebrating along the way. So small tangible goals are really important, but particularly when they're performance related. So for a lot of my clients, I have clients who don't even enjoy resistance training that much, but they love running. So for them, it's okay, how many runs are you going to go on with your running club? How many are you going to do by yourself? What's the kind of time or the distance that we're aiming to hit this week? And all of that is tied in with their fat loss goal. So their fat loss goal almost becomes a little bit kind of like under the radar, because they're so busy focused on, right, today I've got to hit 30, I've got to hit 30-minute run to get 5K done in that time. And then it gets more exciting because they're celebrating something other than just what they're looking like. And that can actually end up being quite stressful and quite like disappointing if your body doesn't change significantly each week, which sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it takes a bit longer for us to see those physical changes.
Yeah, and I suppose the first thing, the big thing that came to mind as well is kind of why, in a way, slimming clubs in a way are still so popular and so many people still opt for them, because they've still got a community, but it's just focused on the completely wrong things. And it's, okay, how much like weight have you lost this week? And it can be stuff completely outside of our control. But when we have the runs, when we have the strength stuff, that's kind of us showing up, that's us doing the work, and over time that's going to improve. So that's completely in our control. How much our weight drops, we can't really do much about that. Like we put the work in, but it doesn't always kind of happen exactly as we want it to be.
Yeah, exactly that. Like the thing is, we all know, like when you're an experienced coach, or if you just have a good amount of knowledge when it comes to fitness and health, that your body weight is going to fluctuate so much every week depending on like a million factors, the amount of food that you're consuming, the type of food, how your stress levels are, how your hormones are as a female in particular. So going off scale weight, one, is not the only thing that you need to do, but also looking at pictures. But then when you can celebrate, the fact that this week I've got all my steps in, I've got all my training in, I've managed all of my food, and I've spent time with my family and had some downtime, that is a perfect week, regardless of whatever the hell the scale says. And that's the really important like perspective that I empower like all of my clients to take, that we don't just celebrate the win of the scale. And some of my clients, we don't even weigh them at all, because if they've got negative feelings towards it, what's the point in using the scale? I can know that they're doing everything they need to through photos and through how they're tracking things and communicating with me.
Yes, yeah, for sure. So with the community side of things, a lot of, or maybe quite a bit of the people listening might feel, okay, fitness, like I'm really new to this, or I'm not doing much. Like going to a run club, going to a strength club, maybe it might feel a little bit daunting, because in our head we can kind of get stuck into the idea of thinking, okay, everyone knows what they're doing. I have no idea. Like, is there a way to, in a way, in your opinion, create a community which isn't that daunting, or is it just kind of going in there and seeing it's not like?
Yeah, absolutely, there is a way. And this is a thing of like social media. It's such a brilliant place now where, depending on what you're aiming for or what position you're in, you can find anyone who's got a similar story to you online, whether it's searching something in YouTube or searching for podcasts just to listen to someone talking about the same experience. Or whether you're looking on Instagram, people that might be mums and they've got loads of kids, they're single mums, they've got to deal with these kids and look after them, provide for them, but they still want to lose, the mum tum or whatever they're going through at that time. You can find all of these communities online, and then literally just dropping someone a message. That's as simple as it takes to connect with someone. For me, like, and my clients, the community that we have, like in terms of our own group and everyone messaging each other, going to events together, is phenomenal. When everyone joins the team, they are just an individual who's looking to improve themselves, but then someone puts out a hand and says, hey, nice to meet you, what's your goals? So just like the online community is phenomenal. But even if you're worried about stepping foot in the gym for the first time, taking a loved one, taking a friend, a family member, or even just going to the gym and chatting to one or two PTs to see whether they might be able to just guide you through your first few sessions is so important. Because as uncomfortable as it might be to take that first step, it's going to be like an embrace to feel like you are, finding your own tribe of who's going to help to propel you forwards. Because if you don't have that, then it's going to be a very, very lonely journey. And I don't even think I'd be where I am now if I hadn't always had the support of others around me.
Yes, it is very easy to just sack things off when you're on your own. You can get stuck in your own head a lot and just kind of think, okay, I've done really well, I'll just do something else for this week. And it's really easy to do that. But having that support and listening to people, even just kind of from a podcast or YouTube video, you can almost be like, okay, like they kind of understand me, they get me, they're in the same shoes. It's all right. This is how I should be feeling. It's fine to feel anxious or whatever it might be, but it's not the end of the world. I can kind of overcome it in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone starts off in the same position, right? I remember going into the gym, not having a clue how to use the equipment, having a little bit of like a panic attack, starting to get upset, and then like running out and leaving. Like I was that person. Here I am 4 years later, stepping on a bodybuilding stage in tiny sparkly underwear, right? So like the way that your life can transition when every single choice that you make day to day, every micro decision to maybe step outside of your comfort zone and do something new can propel you to being in a completely different place in the future. But it's just having the hope and the faith and taking that little chance and seeing where it lands you. And so that's one thing that I would encourage anyone to do if they are starting to go on their own fitness journey, even if it's just someone to help hold you accountable. It is, phenomenally important. I wouldn't be where I am without even just having all of the coaches that I've had, because without their support, how would I have got here? Like I've still had my own challenges and own obstacles, and having someone to speak to about it is needed. Like even coaches need coaches.
Yeah, 100%. And it's like the people around us might not kind of get us all. Like they're doing something else, and if the people around us aren't supportive, it's even like crucial that we do find the people and we do find our tribe that is going to propel us forward. So just want to kind of just to touch on it briefly, from your big journey and your big transformation. One big thing you mentioned at the beginning was like binge eating, and that being a struggle, like for people listening in and maybe feeling similar or feeling like they struggle with it in a way. Like when do we differentiate between, okay, it's been a good week, but Friday, Saturday, I've kind of gone over and had a bit of a night out, I've binged, I've failed, like quote unquote failed kind of thing. And the actual kind of serious side of binge eating, that's kind of outside of our control. I know there's kind of two big differences on that as well. And kind of how do we spot and differentiate between the two?
Yeah, this is a really good question, actually. And this is something I wanted to talk about in depth a little bit more on my podcast, which is one of the episodes I'd planned. And it's great that you've given me a platform to do so here. So in terms of like a binge eating disorder and then overeating, or having maybe like a binge episode, that is something where there is an element of choice involved in one, but there is not a choice in the other. So binge eating disorder is totally uncontrolled to the point where you're eating and eating and eating. You can't seem to stop. You feel like you're almost having like a little bit of like an out of body experience. You're just kind of stuffing your face full of food because something has triggered it, and afterwards you feel horrible, you feel guilty, you feel really bloated, almost to the point of sickness. That is binge eating, and that's kind of what I had suffered with. But then when you've got overeating, maybe you've been great all week, then it gets to Friday and you hit the fuck it button and you're like, oh, I'm going to order a pizza, right? And you're going to order a pizza in, and you sit there and you eat the pizza and you're just like, oh, I probably shouldn't have done that, but I enjoyed the pizza. You've made that choice to order that pizza. You've waited for it. You've unboxed it. You've had a slice. You've had another one. At no point did you feel like you physically could not stop eating. That's the difference. So I also think that there's like an element of emotional eating, which might come to the stage where people might have restricted a lot, or they've had something stressful happen in life and they end up overeating. That is still conscious eating, right? You're still eating because you're sad and you feel like the gingerbread is going to make you feel better, or whatever the hell you're eating around Christmas time. Like, again, if you're still fully aware and you're actively making those choices to go and order something, to go and eat somewhere, that is not binge eating. Binge eating is, you are totally out of control of that.
And I suppose with that, it is really important for people that do feel resonate with the latter, with kind of being out of control, to not try and tackle it on their own and kind of maybe reach out and speak to someone about it. Or
Yeah, absolutely. Like reaching out to someone for my binge eating was the best thing that I ever did. So it got to the point where I couldn't pretty much go one day without having a binge, like without buying loads of food and just sitting and like eating and devouring all of it. Or, you know, even to the point where I was like eating food out of the bin, right? Throwing away food because I didn't want to eat it. Yeah, I would go and eat all of that food because there was something underlying which had caused me to have that as my only way of feeling like, you know, I could fill whatever void I was having emotionally, due to kind of like other issues that I've been through in my past, which are kind of integrated in not the best way mentally. So that was the point where I physically felt terrible all the time. I couldn't do day-to-day tasks, and I couldn't really think because I had such intense food focus and all I could think about was eating all of the time. That was the point where I was like, I need help. This needs to stop because it's impacting the way that I can, you know, go about my daily life. I remember once I ate so much before an exam that during like one of my third year uni exams, like I couldn't focus because I felt like I was going to be sick throughout the whole exam from a binge eating episode. Like that is the point where you reach out to someone that's going to be able to help, such as a binge eating specialist, a charity. There are so many people who can help, you know, therapists, whether they're private, whether it's the NHS, but just acknowledging it and speaking to someone will change your life. Because if I hadn't done that, you know, who's to say that I ever would have got to the stage where I'm here coaching others to get over such kind of poor relationships with food.
Yeah, and it just kind of from an outside perspective as well, I suppose, with in a way bodybuilding at the tail end of it being so food focused, in a way, I suppose, kind of having that taken care of like way back just means that you're like in a much stable position to tackle that in a way, I suppose, rather than potentially have it flare up again. I would imagine.
Yeah, to be honest, like if we're looking on the surface, if someone comes to me and they say that they've had like a binge eating disorder before, I would definitely be like, you really need to be careful about whether you're going to consider competing. And it's funny that I say that almost hypocritically, having gone through it myself, but it was one of my biggest fears going into bodybuilding prep, is to think that my binge eating could come back. And it's something that never leaves you. It's something that you will always kind of go through periods of time where you might feel like you're close to a binge, or you might have those feelings again, but you learn how to process those differently. And that's exactly what I help my clients to do. But it is something where I was finding it really kind of worrying going into that prep. But actually by that point, I'd realized that I had all of the tools, I had all of the knowledge. And for me, like I got really good at ignoring hunger and the feeling of hunger and differentiating hunger and emotions, knowing that, you know, food wouldn't solve my emotions, but also knowing that despite my physical hunger, I couldn't eat food because I had a stage to get on and I cared more about that. So it's something which took a long time, I think, to finally, you know, I describe it as sometimes in your brain the wires get crossed. You know, when emotionally you're feeling one kind of way, you seek comfort from those emotions. Sometimes people think that food is the answer because we like food and it, you know, boosts your happy hormones, but actually it's not food that we need. It might be a cuddle, or it might be, you know, working through whatever issues you're having. So that's kind of the root of this disordered eating and why people tend to go to food instead. Once I detached that and I had the tools to do that, you know, bodybuilding isn't a problem, because when I'm dieting, I'm like, right, I'm dieting for a purpose. I know that food is never going to be there for solving my issues any longer.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I think it's kind of like now as well, I'd imagine it's kind of a more potentially having gone through that period of kind of feeling hungry a lot more often, competing, that the kind of hunger, like you're kind of like, I suppose, gauging hunger in a way is a lot better now because of that experience, maybe. So that might help, but again, it was probably not something that you would recommend going in, like being careful kind of going into a bodybuilding prep, if you've had the binge eating background.
Yeah, so like I got very good at differentiating what I'd call psychological hunger and physical hunger. Physical hunger is like, you know, your stomach is gurgling, you feel kind of like lightheaded, you're lacking energy, you feel lethargic, and it doesn't come on super quickly. It's always kind of like lingering, and over time it gets, you know, more and more hungry. And you know that you need to eat a meal. Psychological hunger is very quick, and all of a sudden you've got intense food focus. You tend to be thinking about really highly palatable foods, and you just kind of immediately will think about things, I know, like chocolate, like biscuits, whatever, because you know that those are your favorite and you know that they're comforting. So that's a bit of a difference between that, you know, physical and psychological hunger. when talking about, I wouldn't advise someone to get to know hunger really well if they're dealing with a binge eating disorder. Like, absolutely. The one thing that you want to do when you've got a binge eating disorder is take away all restriction. Like, you need to feed your body, you need to give yourself that unconditional permission to eat however much you would like and get confident with eating food. And that's really hard to do, because 9 times out of 10 people who are struggling with binge eating are trying to aim for fat loss and they've been restricting before. So the one thing that you do when you're trying to get over binge eating is give yourself that permission to eat food. And once you no longer are physiologically hungry, so your body is not hungry, and you've learned to detach that kind of psychological hunger from food, you're not thinking of food to deal with your emotions, then you're in a safe space to, if you would like perhaps again to aim for fat loss after you've learnt those tools, after you stop restricting, to possibly, with the guidance of someone, move into a fat loss phase to see whether that is something which you would manage well, like implementing that restriction again, but only when you really feel that, you've had a long stretch of being in a really good place with relation to, no binge episodes, and that you're feeling confident and happy around food.
Yeah, and it sounds like kind of removing that restriction in the first place and then not having to binge. It sounds like such a logical way to do it, rather than like having those kind of binge episodes, but then also like having those kind of binge episodes occasionally, but then trying to restrict even further. It sounds like it's just a recipe for disaster, and recipe to maybe potentially aggravate it. So like you say, kind of tackling that first is going to make it a lot easier to then pick up the pace with fat loss as well.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, like when it comes to my clients, if there's one thing that I will never do, it's if my clients have a body composition related goal such as fat loss, right? I will never put them into fat loss if I know that they've got an issue with emotional eating, with binge eating, anything along those lines. We tackle teaching them how to eat mindfully, how to take time away from tracking their food first. When they're in a place where they're confident around social occasions, social events, being out of routine, they can still manage to fuel themselves and they're feeling happy within food. Like, that is the point where after that we can move them into fat loss. But a lot of the time, it doesn't work well that way, because people won't want to let go of the fact that they want to lose body fat. They're worried that they'll gain weight. They're terrified about taking time away from tracking. And unfortunately, that is one of the situations where it's, trusting the process, trusting your coach, and realizing that that's for your long-term benefit. Because unless you want your whole life to be ruled by food and to be ruled by binge eating, you're going to have to do something that feels uncomfortable, which is stop restricting, in order to be able to get you to the point where you no longer feel the need to rely on food as an emotional crutch.
Is that the way we would, to the previous example, is that the way we would also go about the kind of fuck it scenario, which is like not like just kind of overeating over on a Friday or Saturday typically, probably over Christmas, but like kind of overeating, and is that kind of how we'd still go about it in the same manner if that's kind of our big struggle when it comes to fat loss?
Yeah, so when it comes to the moments of like what I call the all or nothing approach, you're either completely on it or then you hit the fuck it button and everything's ruined. So a lot of the time, I believe that's because people haven't been taught how to practice eating mindfully at social events, taking time away from a meal plan, taking time away from tracking their food, and knowing how to eat what I would refer to as an adult and not like an arsehole. So, honoring your hunger cues, appreciating the fact that you can try a little bit of everything. You're going to sit and enjoy it, taste it, chew it, be present with that food and not be distracted, not give in to the presence of other people distracting you or, suggesting that you have certain foods, but just being confident and comfortable in your decisions, enjoying that, knowing that food's always going to be there tomorrow, and then getting back on track. So this is where people haven't been taught to either manage their social occasions appropriately, because it's not something that, their coaches might get them to practice often, which is what I do with my team. Or alternatively, it could be the fact that they are just not that they're not that aligned with their goals or what it takes to get there. Because at the end of the day, if you want to achieve fat loss, you do have to be disciplined. Now, you can have flexibility within that discipline, manage your social events with your coach, map out how you can have that off-plan meal so you can do what you like, but also stay on track. You can do that. But if you don't really want it bad enough and you don't really have, the discipline as to what is required to get there, you're never going to achieve your goal. So sometimes it's just being honest with yourself and wondering, am I willing to sacrifice all of my current habits in order to achieve fat loss? And if you're not, then those are the clients that, you know, I might struggle to coach to achieve fat loss. And I'll say, right, we're going to pull you out of a fat loss phase and we're going to put you into a maintenance or a lifestyle phase, which gives them more flexibility about their diet, more autonomy. No, they won't achieve fat loss, but they'll learn how to be happy, healthy, and maintain their body weight at least.
Yeah, so would you say kind of like one of the big things to first tackle is just kind of mapping out or gaining clarity around kind of what kind of habits we need to be doing and what kind of discipline tasks we need to be implementing to achieve our goal, and then just having an honest conversation if we haven't got a coach at the beginning or just listening initially, to just kind of, I suppose, have an honest conversation with ourselves and be like, okay, can I implement these tasks and action steps to get there? Would that be the first step in a way, or?
Yeah, I think it even goes before that, to be honest. I think the first step is getting clear on your goals, like having clarity of what your goals are and setting tangible goals in the kind of short term and long term. Like, where do you want to be in a month? What about 30 days? What about 6 months? Okay, cool. Now from those goals, let's reverse engineer the steps that you need to get there. And then reverse engineer it even further. What do I need to start doing today in order to get to my 1 month goal? That's what I would say is the main thing that people need to do and people often lack doing, because they can say, oh, I want to progress with fat loss, or, oh, I want to step on stage at one point. Right, okay, well, that's really murky waters. Like, let's actually put some numbers on it, or seriously put like a time frame on it, and then make up the plan as to get you there. Because without clear goals, there is no direction. Without direction, you're going to be chasing your tail and you're not getting anywhere. You're just wasting time.
Yeah, and it's so common as well. Like you say, as well, it's so common to have that big kind of dreamy goal in a way, stepping on stage, being like on a beach somewhere looking incredible, but not also taking a look at all the things that we have to do in a way to get there, and potentially some of the struggles along the way. Because if we can't visualize the struggles, then we're probably not gonna have the best mechanisms to cope with them when they do come up, kind of thing. So doing that is huge.
Yeah, always planning for a little bit of contingency time is fantastic. It's what I did when it came to my prep. Like, I, prepped for 6 months, for instance, and even that wasn't long enough to get me as lean as I possibly could. Like, when it came to my last show, that week I was still progressing with fat loss. I was still getting leaner, which goes to show that for me at my final show, I wasn't the leanest I could have got. So there is an element there of always, thinking that as much as you will try to plan for things, life throws you curveballs a lot of the time. And so 9 times out of 10, it will take you a little bit longer than expected to reach certain goals. Sometimes not, but actually knowing that you're in it for the long run and mapping out the exciting milestones and chapters of that long stretch of progress is going to be what keeps you, motivated for the whole time, because it helps to kind of add in those mini celebrations along the way, rather than I'll be happy when I lose 20 kilos. Well, okay, you might lose 20 kilos next year. Like, what are you going to celebrate before then?
Yeah, and I think it's so common, like you say, with that kind of all or nothing approach, just kind of setting goals, like super extreme stuff to achieve really, really quickly. And then when we slip up or something doesn't quite work out the way we want it, we can't stick to it, we kind of we feel like we're not good enough, or we're failing, and we kind of get overwhelmed, we go back as well. So just a final one on the kind of all or nothing and the kind of like eating outside of things. So to me, it sounds like kind of the mindful eating and kind of eating like an adult side of things as well. It's just more about realizing, okay, if you go out, have a meal, you eat like an adult, you can't fail. It's not about, have overeaten, I failed on my diet. It's almost like it's all like a learning curve, but it's never kind of failing in a way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Every single time, even now, like when I go out for a meal, I might look at the menu and like, say I'm getting tapas, right? I'll order like 4 or 5 different bits. Then I'll start eating and it will get to the point where I'm like, oh, I'm kind of getting full and there's still like a lot of food here, right? So I have miscalculated my hunger, or I've miscalculated my appetite, but I won't eat past the point of fullness. However, sometimes I continued eating until my stomach has realized that I'm full. So those moments have been like, right, next time need to slow down a little bit more. So you still learn every single time you practice this, right? But as long as afterwards you have either a takeaway of a lesson, or you're happy with the choice that you've made, or you haven't given into the peer pressure of other people telling you to drink or eat a certain type of food, every single time, that's a win. You can't fail, because you've just got to do what's right for you. And that's going to be different for each and every person, but just getting confident with the fact that you are, in control. As long as you're always in control, then that's an awesome, awesome kind of celebration to have of the way that you're managing those events.
And this is so much more empowering than like always, in a way, like always having to rely on just one thing, like one diet approach, one, like just, like you say, tapas. It's going to be probably quite hard to track. So not always having to have that kind of tracking or that side of things, just having yourself as well. And that's something that's always with you, right? And you can always kind of listen to yourself and be like, okay, what am I actually feeling for? Am I mindful of what I'm eating? Am I just kind of stuffing it down? And that's really powerful, because you can always carry that around with you.
Yeah, exactly. Like, your body best, right? Like, how you work best. And so that's why it's so nice to become self-aware and in tune with those things, because you'll always be able to take that forward. If you learn how to eat mindfully and you learn how to stay active, you're going to stay in shape for life. And there's no two ways about it. But that's something that I've never had until this point in my life, which is why I was always overweight previously.
Okay. And with the kind of eating mindful bit as well, does that, like with doing better with that, I think a lot of us would kind of see it and be like, I'm just going to eat mindful, but eating mindful is still a little bit blurry for some of us when we initially start. So we just kind of end up doing what we're always doing, not really being mindful. So I suppose it's just kind of having and mapping out kind of the time and the tasks to slow down, to eat, and kind of have at least a bit of an idea of what you're planning on doing, rather than saying I'm going to eat mindful and just do what you always kind of do.
Well, I think there's a difference, right? If I'm eating mindfully, I'm not planning anything. I'm just doing as and when I please to kind of do at that meal. However, like if, say, for instance, you've got a fat loss phase, you're banking calories ahead of an event, and then during that event, you're going to make sure that you choose something on the menu which is a lower calorie option. Yes, you're being kind of self-aware that you're making actions in line with your goal there. But if I'm talking about just being mindful of how I'm eating day to day, throughout each meal and kind of throughout the day, I'm checking in with, am I physically hungry? Do I feel like I want a meal? If I want a meal, what do I want to have? And then when I'm eating that, I'm checking in with myself. Do I want any more? Do I feel like I need any more? Am I actually enjoying this? Am I being present and enjoying this meal, like rather than just being distracted? That, I would say, is more mindful eating, where you're completely self-aware the whole time. Whereas when it comes to getting into that routine or habit first, you've got to check whether that aligns with your goals. So say if you do have like a fat loss goal, right, then maybe like eating mindfully is going to need to be structured a little bit alongside planning and preparing for the meal that you're going out for. Still obviously honoring everything that I've said there, not eating past the point of fullness, honoring your hunger cues. But if you're trying to do something which is in line with that fat loss goal, you're going to have to be a bit more meticulous in the choice that you make. But say for me at the moment, I'm in a growth phase, in a building phase, I'm in a calorie surplus anyway. I don't need to try and preempt or track what meal I'm having. I just need to eat enough and make sure that I'm happy with that amount.
This is amazing, because a lot of us can get swept up down the route of, oh, I've always got a diet, I've always got to push really hard, and I've always got to be I always have to push really hard. I always have to be in a like fat loss phase in a way, and kind of mapping this out in the beginning and just kind of understanding when you are going to be in a fat loss phase and when you are going to be a bit more meticulous with your tracking and with your nutrition, but also mapping out the periods where you might have a lot going on and you might not have fat loss as the main priority. It just allows you to keep things a lot more consistent long term, and kind of being a much better kind of frame of mind around it all as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, you don't want to diet forever. You don't need to diet forever. So when it comes to taking that time away from, being in a fat loss phase, needing to be so meticulous, this is an incredible skill to have, because this is what will allow you to maintain your body weight, enjoy, you know, life experiences, make memories, have social events. That's really important. During my prep, there was not one day of mindful eating. You know, I was tracking every single gram of food, down to even tracking the 0-calorie monsters, which, you know, just to make sure that there's nothing in it. Like that for 6 months was a complete extreme, but that's not sustainable, and neither is a fat loss phase for a long period of time. So, you know, implementing diet breaks along the way, or just taking time away from a fat loss phase in order to give yourself a bit of a mental and physical reset. You know, if you're having holidays and things like that, it's totally appropriate, because unless you're an athlete who is prepping for a competition, or if you're someone who's prepping for a photo shoot, there is no need to be so 100% meticulous throughout the whole year. It's just quite unhealthy, to be honest, because it stops you and limits you from doing things that we're put on this earth to do, which is to have a really good time and eat some good food.
Yeah, amazing. But so, and also, like, just to, I suppose, touch on that, like with kind of having those like phases where we are more meticulous and where we are kind of leading up to something, whatever it might be, and having that kind of those tracking phases, from a calorie standpoint, probably also helps us a lot to be more mindful, because we're like, okay, this actually has this many calories. I could maybe switch it, like not cooking with like 4 tablespoons of olive oil and just using fry, like that kind of thing. Is still helps us potentially when we get into a more mindful phase.
Yeah, definitely. Funnily enough, that's a conversation that I had with one of my clients this week. Like she was asking about using cooking oil in her fat loss phase, and I kind of said, if this is the amount of oil you're going to use, this is how many calories it equates to, and this is how many meals that equates to, extra meals per week. Or you could use fry light. So it's one of those moments where it is, you know, getting the knowledge for yourself when it comes to tracking your own food. You don't necessarily need to track forever, but if you do learn the macronutrients and the energy content of food, that's going to stay with you forever, because it's not like you forget that, you know, a really big avocado will have, you know, 250 calories. So as nice as like the health halo is surrounding the avocado being a good bit of, you know, micronutrient dense food to eat, it's still very, very high in fat. And if you're eating, you know, a good few avocados a day, that's definitely not going to help you in your fat loss phase.
And there's so many things out of the avocado. There's so many foods that we kind of think and we're programmed to think are healthy because it might say like protein on the pack, or it might have nuts in it. It might be like a granola bar in it. It's really not. So I suppose kind of finding those things and just seeing it makes it so much easier to go into it. And I think, would you say for the majority of us, tracking and using something like MyFitnessPal is a crucial tool to implement at some point, especially if we are looking to use fat loss? And is there another way to do it, or for the most of us,
Yeah. I'd say I definitely think that everyone should at some point get that nutritional understanding of what the energy contents of food are, especially from a standpoint of where you're getting, you know, protein, carbohydrates, and what food sources they come from. Yes, it's wonderful to be given a meal plan, to follow that meal plan to a T, and to make sure that you are progressing towards your goals. But what happens when you don't have that meal plan? Yes, you've got results, but why have you got results? Do you know? Like, if not, then you haven't educated yourself. So you've got progress, but you haven't got education. It's not to say that you need that the whole time. It's not to say you need to always track. But for a lot of my clients, I will at some point pull them away from a meal plan to give them a bit of a phase where they can track their own food, which tends to be a kind of maintenance or lifestyle phase, if not even a building phase, where they have more calories. So they're not kind of triggered by numbers if they are lower when they're in a fat loss phase, for instance. So at some point, I will always give everyone the tools that they need to track their own food. I've had clients who have gone on to tracking their own food. They haven't enjoyed it and they preferred the structure of a meal plan. So we've moved them back, but they've still got that experience to know, you know, how many calories are in an avocado. So that sticks with them.
And this is something that I think typical, like you say, meal plan or just typical diet culture like doesn't do. It doesn't give us the tools to know how, and it doesn't give us much education. It just goes, eat this kind of one thing, one meal plan, one diet, for life basically, and that's how you kind of get results and keep them. But tackling at the source and getting clear on the education side of things with tracking at some point just makes it so much easier to get results in a way that we can kind of at least know how to keep them like a lot better.
Yeah. Exactly. It's the same thing as to if someone says, oh, I'm going to give you a driving license, but maybe you've only like driven a car once before. You get in the car and you're like, okay, great, I can drive legally, but actually now I'm by myself. I have no idea what I'm doing. Like that's the exact same when it comes to learning, you know, through a meal plan. If you don't know why that meal plan has been working, then when you're by yourself, because your coach isn't going to be with you forever, 9 times out of 10, you'll move on, or, you know, you might just decide that you don't need coaching or get a new coach, whatever. But if you don't have those tools, then what are you going to do when the stabilizers are off and you have no idea what you're doing, right? So it's so important to educate yourself throughout the process. Like, and it's not like this education is going anywhere. As I said, like this is how you stay in shape for life.
Yeah, it's not like avocados are magically going to like reduce in calories or go up in calories. They're going to always stay exactly where they're at.
Exactly that.
So just one on, like you touched on bodybuilding like a little bit in terms of leading up to it as well. Like a lot of the kind of things that can come up with bodybuilding on the surface, looking in on bodybuilding or looking on like on Instagram, it can, as a bit of a myth, come across too extreme for the majority of us. To me, in a way, bodybuilding is more along the lines of, okay, it's just progressive overload. It's just kind of getting a little bit better and better and optimizing things down the line. What are your thoughts on kind of bodybuilding being so extreme? And could we kind of apply elements of bodybuilding even if we're not planning on being on a stage?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of like bodybuilding, I think that that is still the process of bodybuilding, which is, you know, gaining muscle, then dieting down to step on a stage and show off your muscle, and then repeating that cycle each kind of year. That is something which I apply to my clients, aside from the fact that there will be maybe like a maintenance or a lifestyle phase, which if they don't want to lose fat and if they don't want to build muscle, we'll teach them how they can keep their body weight consistent, how they can keep their structure and routine consistent without that actually ever kind of you know, detracting from what their overall goal is, whether that's performance related. So there's loads of elements of bodybuilding that are in our own journeys, but bodybuilding is just the point to where things do get pushed to an extreme. For instance, dieting to step on stage as a bodybuilder, you have to get very, very lean, which is massively unsustainable. It's not healthy to get that lean. And similarly, when it comes to a lot of the assistance that's used for the fat loss side of bodybuilding or even the muscle growth side of bodybuilding, you're putting hormones into your body which are not naturally there, right? So when you're starting to dabble in assistance, which, you know, the general population wouldn't do, that is equally unhealthy, and you have to be way more meticulous at managing your health. So there are elements in terms of like the discipline, the routine, the phases of bodybuilding that completely transition over to, you know, just being a happy and healthy individual when it comes to your own fitness journey. And it is really lovely to look up to and, you know, aspire to be as disciplined as others are. But I definitely don't think that people should get their wires crossed and assume that they need to be as disciplined as a bodybuilder, because they are doing it as a competitive athlete. They're not doing it as someone who's just trying to be happy and healthy and sustain a, you know, a longevity within their life as to continuing to do something fitness related.
Yeah, and even then, like with like what we see, I think with a competitive like bodybuilder athlete is like he's working really hard and is meticulous, but he might be meticulous for the next 20 weeks while he's prepping. And our idea is, okay, he's this meticulous all the time. I've got to do it for the next 20 years, and it's like you say, it's even more unsustainable for the majority of us, and puts it like out of reach completely. But so from a principles point of view with your client stuff, what are the kind of principles from bodybuilding you have taken and implemented with them?
Yeah, so it's a lot of lifestyle factors. So keeping a consistent routine, keeping a consistent sleep and wake routine, 7 to 8 hours of sleep per night, like good quality, kind of like holistic approach where we manage their stress levels, we manage their digestion. Many bodybuilders, you know, we need to optimize digestion to assimilate all of the food that we're consuming for performance. We need to get enough sleep so that we're recovering and growing as much muscle tissue as possible. We need to manage our stress, because when you get stressed, you retain water and it can impact your physique. It can also impact the way that your routine is working if you're like mentally not in a good place. So all of that applies to my clients, even down to like meal timings, making sure that they're spacing their meals equally throughout the day, pre and post workout meals. All of that nutrition element side of things does apply to some of my clients, not to all of them. but to some of them we're trying to optimize as a bodybuilder would do. So there are plenty of elements that kind of apply across, because at the end of the day, when you're training to be a bodybuilder, you need to make sure every single tiny little variable is as perfect as possible for your performance related goals and to allow you to look the best within your physique. It's just a little bit different when it comes to applying that to general population or people who are living, you know, a happy lifestyle. It's just making sure that that structure is in their life so that they can balance, you know, their work and their training, or so that they can balance being a stay-at-home mum and their training, and being happy and healthy in terms of everything that they do need to do, whilst also living a social life, you know, not constantly going on a bender and getting 3 hours of sleep so that you can't get to training the rest of the week and you're trying to just, you know, drag yourself out of bed to get to work, but implementing the importance of sleep throughout that whole week. So all of that good stuff does still apply to my clients.
Yeah, and I'd argue kind of optimizing, like, for kind of just optimizing around work, around those things, for us is kind of like doing so, it is more around kind of like making ourselves like what's going to bring us the most happiness, and what's going to be in alignment with our kind of end goal. And if it's happiness, if it's kind of energy alongside looking our best, or looking at the way we want to look and strength kind of things, it's optimizing that alongside that, like you say, kind of the benders and that side of things. Like, is that really in alignment with the end goal for us, and having that vision at the beginning? This is where this is going to make the optimizing side of things a lot easier.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I've had so many clients who have started with me, and over time I've got them to reconsider, you know, what social events are truly important for you to attend every week. And after a while, where they kind of pick and choose and prioritize social events and occasions and things that they are doing to be the ones that are really important to them, it's not throwing them out of routine for most of their week, and actually they feel good all round all the time. And they learn how to say no, because that's one thing I feel like a lot of people struggle with, is how to say no. But I had 6 months where I said absolutely no to pretty much everything, unless it involved cardio training, eating the meals I needed to, and sleeping. So like, I'm very good at teaching people how to say no if it doesn't serve them.
Yeah, okay. And I suppose it's just kind of like finding what you want to say no to, and what you want to do at the beginning, because it can be kind of like with training as well. It can go both ways. It can go like, okay, I really want to look like this person on Instagram, look like a bodybuilder, or achieve a particular look. But if you're not willing to say no to the things that need to get you there, then it's probably not going to happen. And it's the same with the other side of things. If you have a lifestyle goal, and it's kind of saying yes to the right kind of things, and say no to that, getting mixed up here. So
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's plenty of things that you need to just be confident in your decision in. Same as what we were talking about when it came to that mindful eating, right? It's just analyzing your choices all the time and knowing whether that's in line with your goals, whether you're truly happy to do it. And at the end of the day, are you, throughout all of these decisions, doing what you actually want to? And if you don't know what you want, then, as I said, go back and really map out those goals. And that's the starting point to start to transition yourself into generally like really being on track to get you to a point where you only ever imagined you or hoped that you would get to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is, like, from a goal setting standpoint, like, rewatch these bits, but there is also like your purpose episode on Spotify is a really good one around that as well, which I'll try and link below. So Millie, just a final one to finish up on, and keep your calendar and your timing on point. One big thing I kind of like to finish off with these podcasts is just kind of from your journey, kind of with the big transformation, where you started off with to the last 4 years and where you are now. Throughout that period, what do you feel like is your biggest lesson?
Yeah, I think my biggest lesson is truly realizing that I can do whatever I set my mind to, which sounds like crazy, and I never thought that would be the case. But there has been one thing that I've noticed throughout like my life, is that, you know, I can get knocked down 5 times or stand up 6. Like, I will always be really resilient, but what I never really had was a whole amount of self-belief. But as I kind of talked about earlier in the episode, as to, you know, stepping out your comfort zone, doing all of these little decisions, which might seem a little bit scary, but taking these risks, the more that I've taken them, the more that I have had success from them, whether that's in my, you know, fitness journey, bodybuilding journey, business journey, like anything, even personal. Everything has all accumulated to me getting to a point where I truly am every single day grateful and happy to wake up to do what I do. And I never thought I'd get to this point. I always thought I was going to be in the rat race, working away, doing what I needed to do, and actually not being confident or happy in my own body, which is now quite the opposite. It's because I decided that, no, I'm going to do that. I'm going to find a way, set the goals, and keep being resilient in order to get there. So I think just really starting to get some self-belief alongside setting those goals has transformed things a lot for me.
Yeah, and it sounds like the kind of self-belief side of things as well. We might lack it initially, but the more we kind of put ourselves out there, the more we test ourselves and get outside of our comfort zone, the more we're like, oh, okay, shoot, I can actually do this. Like, what's next?
Yeah, exactly that. That's the only way that I figured it out. It wasn't because I sat down and concentrated on believing in myself. It was because the more uncomfortable things I did that worked out, the more comfortable I got with taking bigger risks.
Amazing. So Millie, wrapping up, like, is there anything you want to add from this podcast at all?
Just to say thank you for having me. Like, I really, really enjoyed it. It's been a really awesome conversation that we've covered a lot of different topics. And I think that there's a few here that we've covered that I will be expanding on my podcast, because you've given me a few light bulb ideas. So thank you so much for having me. And yeah, if anyone does kind of want to listen to any of the content which I've touched on, like in this episode, then, you know, the Mindset Mill podcast is where they can find my other content as well. So hopefully it can be of help to some of you who are listening.
Yeah, brilliant. Really, really enjoyed this conversation. Like, I will plug these stuff below. So, where essentially, if people want to find you, I'd guess kind of it's the Mindset Mill podcast and Instagram. Is that the two best places?
Yeah. So on Instagram at Coach by Millie, and then I've also got a YouTube channel. So I tend to do weekly vlogs and updates on there. So that's just Millie Cvjetkovic. That's just my name. But all of it's linked in my Instagram bio. So whatever you want to find me on, head to Instagram.
Brilliant. Thank you, Millie, for joining us, and I will plug these down below in this conversation.